that
Has it hit 10 o'clock yet?
It's 10 o'clock.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Good morning. Welcome everyone to the October 17th, 2022 meeting of the School Performance and Accountability Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. This meeting is being recorded and will be available after its conclusion via link on the Commission's website. As a reminder, please make sure your microphone light is on before speaking. Before we begin today, Chase, can you take a roll call of the commissioners?
Commissioner Sisnett
Here.
is present. Commissioner Griscom and Chair Richards
Here.
is present. Chairman Richards, you have a quorum.
Thank you. The School Performance and Accountability Committee will consider 4 items on our agenda today. First, Maggie Lund will provide the committee an update on the revisions made to the Commission's School Performance Framework and discuss the 2021-2022 Commission Annual Report. Next, Melanie Harrell, Maggie Lund, and Kelly Croneman will provide the committee with an LEA operational updates. Then we will have a special populations presentation from Kelly Croneman and Reggie Epps. Do the commissioners have any questions or comments before we vote to approve this agenda? All right, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second, all in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. All right, our next matter of business is the minutes for the July 27, 2022 meeting, which have been provided for our review. Does anyone have any edits or comments to make regarding the prior minutes before we proceed? Okay, is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, okay. Maggie Lund will be presenting the Charter Commission School Performance Framework revisions. You're recognized. Oh, and Dragine is here with her to help. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Richards. I'm Maggie Lund. I will provide you the updates regarding our school performance framework. First, an update on state accountability. The state has delayed issuing letter grades for the 21-22 school year. The Tennessee Department of Education has indicated that there may be material changes to the accountability model, which would affect the letter grade calculation along with the current accountability protocol. As you know, in our commission framework, we have a section within the academic portion of the framework that's called student outcomes that is directly aligned to the state accountability model. So at the last commission meeting, we discussed the importance of alignment to the state accountability model for our schools. So this presents a challenge, obviously, when finalizing our framework today. So given that we do not have that information, we are going to bring the rest of the framework for final read, and I'll go into details of that in just a second. So due to this uncertainty with the state accountability model, we are bringing, as I mentioned, all other components of the framework for approval, minus section 1 of the academic portion of the framework, the student outcomes section. We will bring the student outcomes section of the framework in alignment with the TDOE accountability model to the commission once this is available, which we hope will be at the January 2023 meeting. And the framework in front of you includes all updates from our last committee discussion and approval on first read of the remainder of the framework. So I will outline those updates now. So the first update made since approval on first read per guidance from Commissioner Richards is the reallocation of weight within the academic section of the framework to offer bonus points for schools scoring above a meet standard for the TVOS composite indicator section of the framework. I'll outline that in more detail in just a second, but this did affect the overall weight of the academic section of the framework, as you'll see here. So you will see that the student outcomes section of the framework holds 25% to 35% of the weight. And as I mentioned, this student outcome section is directly aligned to the Tennessee Department of Education state accountability model. The mission-specific goal holds 10% of the framework. The comparative performance piece, split between resident district comparison and subgroup comparison, holds 40% of the framework. And the TVOS composite score indicator holds anywhere from 15% for a TVOS 3 to 25% for a TVOS 5. So we have set the MEET standard within the framework as a TVOS 3. So this is an update from our last discussion at our committee meeting. So the way this works is we've added additional weight within the framework that would be awarded to schools that score a TVOS 4 or a TVOS 5. This adjustment was made based on our previous SPA committee discussion to reward schools for making greater than annual typical growth within our framework. While a 3 MEET standard, we have ensured that additional weight within the framework is granted to schools who earn a TVOS 4 at 20% and a TVOS 5 at 25%. So this weight is reallocated from the student outcomes section to the TVOS indicator section. As a part of our finalization process of this framework, between first and final read, we conducted a pressure test of the framework where we ran all currently available school data through the framework to ensure it represented accurate outcomes. Through this process, we did make some adjustments to the framework based on our findings. First, we found that for our subgroup comparison data, the margin between proficiencies for subgroups were smaller than in the overall district comparison. This makes sense as we're looking at smaller groups of students. But ultimately, it was appropriate for us to adjust the threshold for meeting standard to falling within 3% instead of 5%. If the school has a proficiency percentage that is higher than the 3% threshold, they will exceed standard. But it's also important to note that in this scenario, a school cannot meet standard with a subgroup proficiency of 0. There are some cases where the school fell within 3% of the district with a 0% proficiency. And again, remember, we're looking at very small groups of students and numbers here. But for instance, if the subgroup proficiency of the district is 2%, we felt as a commission staff that it was not appropriate for a school to meet standard at 0%. So we believe that a school cannot meet standard with 0% proficiency, but we have updated the threshold to be 3% for the subgroup comparison piece. Another update that was made to the framework per Commissioner Tucker's concern regarding N size and data suppression. Previously, in alignment to the TDOE business rules, we had the N size set at 30. However, we agree that this could drastically limit what we can report regarding our subgroup comparison data specifically, and particularly for schools that are scaling year over year and have limited tested grade levels. So we've adjusted our N size counts to now be 8 per grade level, scaling to a fully built out 4-grade school with an N size of 30. So this means that a school that has 2 tested grade levels would have an N size of 16, 3 tested grade levels would be 24, etc. And this just allows us to hold our schools accountable to better subgroup data and run into less suppression issues in terms of reporting. Also from the pressure test, we came across the need to adjust our year 1 thresholds. We use these in the student outcomes section of the framework if a school is within its first year of operation and does not have a letter grade yet. So we've adjusted the science proficiency as well as some small adjustments to chronic absenteeism in alignment with the data that we're seeing and previous guidance from the TDOE. I also just want to caveat this again and say this may change again once we have better guidance from the Tennessee Department of Education and access to the new accountability model, because we do aim to have this section align with it. So this is not being approved on final read today, but I wanted to note that we did actually take a look at these thresholds as part of the pressure test to ensure that they were representative of what we needed to see with our schools. So a little bit about the pressure test. So after approval on first read, we conducted a pressure test of the framework reflecting the changes and updates. We ran a test for each school with their currently available data, but given the unavailability of some of the data, including letter grades, we made some assumptions. So we ran scenarios for each school with their current data with an A through F letter grade, and then the outcomes of the framework that we don't have for the letter grades yet, we just basically kind of ran it as a model. So, you know, we took every other piece of data we had for that school and then dropped in each letter grade and ran scenarios for each within the pressure test. Additionally, we assumed a MEET standard on the mission-specific goal section because, as you know, those don't exist yet. And again, these are not goals for our schools that have yet been finalized. They will be finalized upon final read of the framework. So finally, given that our ASD transition schools were not yet under the commission in school year 21-22, we ran into some suppression issues because we did not have access to some of that data. And then just as a note, for any data that was suppressed under 5%, we assumed a 4.9% for purposes of the pressure test. Similar with district data, anything under 1%, we assumed a 0.9. So overall, the pressure test ensured that at a baseline model, a school can meet standard with a letter grade of a C, a meet standard for comparative performance, a meet standard for mission-specific goal, and a TVOS 4 or 5. Again, this is a baseline that can fluctuate based on outcomes. So for example, a school with a C and a TVOS 3 could meet standard if they exceeded portions of the comparative performance or mission-specific goal. However, we believe that this outcome is reflective of our school's performance, and it's a solid framework to use to evaluate our schools. So next steps. First, I'd like to give a special thank you for our SPA committee and your participation in this process and the robust discussion that we had back in our July committee meeting. I value your insight and feedback, and I feel very confident with where we've landed today in terms of our framework. I ask you all to approve the new SPF items presented today outside of the student outcome section during our commission meeting. And we intend to bring the full framework with the student outcomes portion for you all for final read in January of 2023 at that meeting. Your initial approval, however, allows us to go ahead and get started in forming mission-specific goals with our operators. And I appreciate your time today, and I'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from anyone, committee members or other commissioners? I just want to thank you and Beth for your hard work in continuing to address the important work in this area, even though we have had delays that are outside of your control. I think it's really important for us to be able to address the remaining criteria with our schools while we await the outcome of the DOE's work on the letter grades and the things we can't address at this meeting. So thank you so much for your flexibility. From looking at this and when we were talking about it, I think it reflects the comments that were made throughout our conversations, and we really appreciate that. It's our intention to bring up the entire framework for approval on final reading after the state's accountability system is finalized, which will probably be in January, we hope. But I do want to entertain a motion to approve the performance framework revisions made between July and today so that the state staff can begin working with school operators on implementing key components of the framework now. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposed? Okay. Yeah. Surely.
I missed when you said other committee or commission members. I just want to thank you for the creative approach to the NSIS, particularly for special populations. I think that is going to solve a lot of problems and will allow us to see what our schools are doing with those achievement gaps, and also will allow us, if we have schools that still have an NSIS problem, that will allow us to look at those schools and have conversations about why they're not enrolling a sufficient number of students with disabilities. So thank you.
All right. We're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is the 2021-2022 school year annual report. And Maggie, you're going to present that for us. So
I am.
Turn
yes.
it over.
Great. So here is an update on our 21-22 school performance annual report. KIPP Antioch College Prep Middle School received reward school status this year. KIPP Antioch College Prep Middle School is doing wonderful work with their students in the Antioch area, and we're excited to celebrate this with them. Their kids are not only growing but achieving, and they're really fantastic things happening in their building. Additionally, Bluff City High School received notification that they were on the cusp of receiving priority status, which is the bottom 10% of schools. We met with Bluff City Executive Director and leadership team regarding their plan of correction and probationary status back in September. And I will provide more detailed updates regarding that plan of correction later on in the presentation. Lester Prep in Memphis also earned priority status. This school transitioned to us from the ASD earlier in August. We met with the executive director of Capstone Education Group earlier this month. Ultimately, this status was earned for data that was garnered when it was authorized by the ASD. However, commission staff are going to closely track the school's progress throughout the year through internal assessment data within their school improvement plan. This plan is managed by our LEA and district team and offers opportunities for frequent touch points and sightlines into internal data and closer oversight. We also discussed the implications of the current law, Tennessee Code Annotated 4913-122, with the operator that outlines a school earning priority status 2 consecutive cycles may have their charter revoked or shall have their charter revoked. Currently, the TDOE has not issued any further guidance around priority status designations, but we have discussed this with the operator.
Before you go any further, is the commission staff satisfied with the school improvement plan that you were working with Lester Prep on?
Yes, that is a collaborative process that happens between our LEA team, our district team, and the school. There's a lot of back and forth that happens with that plan, close oversight. And so as an authorizing team, we're working really closely with our district team to have better oversight of that school through that plan. And as I mentioned, we're looking at internal assessment data. We've already received some from their first quarter assessment that we're looking at as well.
Okay, thank you.
Other annual report updates. We have made some adjustments given the information we've learned through our school performance framework refresh and the impending changes from the Tennessee Department of Education accountability model. We have removed school culture indicators due to alignment issues post-pandemic from the academic section. So it is no longer part of the framework that schools this year will be held accountable to. It's in the organizational performance section instead. Therefore, this year we have also removed, given the issuance of letter grades being delayed, we are going to run our schools through the year 1 thresholds that we have set within the framework. We are already running 2 of our schools through the year 1 thresholds because this is our first year of having proficiency data. So it's really only for 2 other schools that are in our portfolio that this would happen to. And we've already run kind of tests with that, and it does align pretty closely to the performance of the school overall. So we don't see any major concerns with having to pivot to year 1 thresholds in the absence of letter grades. We also adjusted the chronic absenteeism indicator in there as well in better alignment with the accountability protocol that we have received from the Tennessee Department of Ed. So as a district, we are excited to report that we have earned a composite TVOS score of 5, which is wonderful. The chart displayed here also shows the commission's proficiency within the school performance framework as well. I'm now going to take you through individual school performance for the 21-22 school year, and we'll start with Bluff City High School. So as you can see here, Bluff City High School earned a TVOS composite of a 1. Their student achievement falls far below. With ELA, they have 13% proficiency, and their math proficiency fell below 5%, so it's suppressed. The comparative performance also does not meet. They underperformed Memphis-Shelby County as well, and you can see the percentages here. Again, I just want to note that I am going over the Bluff City Plan of Correction in later slides. Moving on to KIPP, Antioch College Prep Elementary. This was their first year with a tested grade level as they have scaled their opening year over year. Therefore, they don't have a TVOS score yet. And we ran their data, their proficiency data, through our year 1 threshold, so that's what you see here. They did a great job. They met standard on ELA and math proficiency. The baseline level of standard is 30% to 50% proficient for the year 1 threshold, so they were actually on the higher band of meeting standard. And their comparative performance exceeds standard, so they overperformed Davidson County, as you can see here. Moving to KIPP Antioch College Prep Middle, just a reminder, this school is a reward school designation for this year. They had a TVOS composite of 5. Their student achievement meets standard at 33.9% proficiency, and their math is at 32.4% proficiency. Their comparative performance, similar to their elementary school, also exceeded Davidson County. They exceeded standard as well within our framework, and you can see those percentages here. Nashville Collegiate Prep, They were a TVOS composite of 3. Again, this school, it was its first year of operation, so we ran it through our year 1 thresholds as well, as they did not have a letter grade calculation. And they will not because they are a year 1 school. The student achievement here does not meet standard. Their ELA proficiency was 25.5% and math was 20.7%. As a reminder, the proficiency bands for our year 1 thresholds are 30 to 50%. And comparative performance did meet standard. They fell within the district average, so they were close to Davidson County. And remember, for the district averages, it's falling within 5% of the resident district. So we are creating spreadsheets that detail all of this information for each school, and it does go through their academics and organizational performance section of the framework. They'll be finalized at the end of October and will be shared with operators and commissioners at that time. The schools are aware of their performance. We talked through this performance with them at our July closeout meetings. And a final annual report will be published in January that reflects the financial section as well. And we'll review this full annual report with you all during the January 2023 meeting.
Thank you, Maggie. Are there any questions for Maggie? Everyone, our chairman, Griscom, has joined us. Good morning, sir. We're going to proceed on. All right.
Great.
We're going to move on to a presentation concerning the commission's operations as an LEA and school district. I would like to recognize Melanie Harrell, Maggie Lund, and Kelly Croneman to provide these updates.
Thank you, Chair Richards. I'm going to first actually turn it over to Kelly Croneman to give a brief update on some of our grants and where we are so far this school year.
Thank you, Commissioner Richards and the rest of our commissioners. So as Melanie mentioned, I'm going to briefly provide an overview of the grants that we have received as a district this fiscal year. After that, Melanie will provide us with a deeper dive into some of our relief funding, and then we'll follow that up with a discussion on the supports that we've provided to schools at the district level. So looking at the grants that we are passing through to our schools for fiscal year 23, first we've got our school-wide pool. Now this is all of the entitlement grants that our schools receive through the consolidated funding application. This includes grants through ESSA Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as IDEA. We have blended these funds into one pool. It provides our schools with greater autonomy and flexibility for how they use these funds in alignment with their school improvement plans. The current status of our fiscal year 23 district allocations is pending. We are still waiting on our final allocations from the Department of Education. This is the second year that we've had a significant waiting period for these final allocations, and this does provide a significant challenge to our schools in terms of their access to funds. We are communicating frequently with our partners over at the Department of Education for updates, but as of yet, so far the updates have been just, we're still waiting. We also want to briefly mention that we are looking at options for updating our IDEA allocation methodology for our schools for the next fiscal year. So we've begun discussions internally as a district team about that, and then we'll be engaging in a robust stakeholder engagement process as we move forward in that process.
Before you go on, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is this delay that we're experiencing being delayed by authorizers and LEAs across the state, so it's common to everyone?
Yes, thank you for that question, Commissioner Richards. Every LEA, as I understand it, is still waiting on their final fiscal year 23 allocations for the consolidated funding application.
Thank you.
Okay. The next grant I want to touch on briefly is the Safe Schools Grant. The current status of this grant is we have completed the application. Our schools have completed their security assessments. Melanie will actually provide a little bit more of a deeper dive into the security assessments in a later slide. But those applications have been submitted to the department in our district level application, and we are waiting on final approval for those funds. The next grant I want to touch on is the Turnaround Action Grant, otherwise known as TAG 2.0. This grant is only available to our schools that have recently exited the ASD. So that's Libertas, Cornerstone Prep Denver, and Lester Prep. Their use of these funds must be aligned very, very closely to their school improvement plans. So that's a way that that grant is similar to the school-wide pool. However, again, this is only for our priority exit schools. The application status for this grant has been submitted. The application has been submitted to the TDOE. We are waiting on final approval from them. Once we obtain that final approval, we will be able to make those funds available to our schools. Thank you. And then lastly, I want to touch on some of the competitive grants that are available to our schools. Bluff City High School continues to utilize the 21st Century Community Learning Center grants. They are completing their budget for that this year, and we'll submit that to TDOE later this month. And then Bluff City has also applied for the Resilient School Communities grants to continue providing some of the mental health supports that they began working on through the relief funding. So they've applied. We've submitted that we've submitted the application, and then the TDOE will be announcing in the coming weeks which districts have been awarded that application or that grant. I will now hand it over to Melanie to talk through our relief funding.
Thank you, Kelly, and commissioners. First, I want to talk a little bit about our ESSER grants. We still have ESSER 2.0 and ESSER 3.0 funds that are available to us this year, and most importantly to our schools. We have encountered a small challenge with this in that our friends that were coming from the ASD are bringing a significant amount of ESSER carryover funds with them, which we are expecting to be loaded into our E-Plan application by the state. We don't yet have that carryover amount finalized, and so we have been waiting and working with our schools to make sure that we can get as ready to release budgets and make sure that we can get that application submitted as soon as possible once we have that carryover amount. We have been working closely with the department and with the ASD and think we're very close to being able to have that allocation loaded, which should resolve some of that delay. We also recently had to submit our updated LEA ESSER plan that includes an updated plan for our use of that funding, which was a great fun to do with some uncertainty in the amount of funding that we have. But I really appreciate the support of our ASD operators in working with us to get us their estimates. They were very thoughtful about making sure that they had their records reconciled and that they could give us a good plan for their use of funds even without sort of final allocations loaded. Some of our other relief funding that I want to talk about is ARP IDA. This is a small supplement for IDA funding that we are also carrying over and are excited to make available to our schools. Last year, I think I mentioned that we received a Best for All District designation, and with that came a $175,000 district award that is really a supplement to ESSER funding. This funding can be used for sort of any ESSER 3 allowable expense other than construction and ESSER costs. And so when we were looking at how to utilize that funding this year, we recognized the challenges that both our new schools that are newly authorized by the commission that still have to contend with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic but had never had access to ESSER funds, as well as sort of the compounding delays for our ASD transitioning schools. And so we ended up passing through 100% of our Best for All funding to our schools to help kind of offset some of the challenges that we know everybody is facing. So we did not retain any of that funding at the district level. We also have 2 schools this year participating in the TN All-Core program. That's Nashville Collegiate Prep and Libertas. And so we are excited to continue working with them. Pam Kimbrough on our team has been working closely with the schools to complete that application and to get that program implemented. And so that comes with some additional funding as well as a state match requirement. And then lastly, I want to just quickly give an overview of some of the supports that we've been providing to our schools this first quarter, especially knowing that we are navigating some uncertainty with some of these funding streams. So most importantly, our team members review all schools' applications for any grant funding. We provide feedback and we do a review. We then roll that information up into our district application and submit it to the state. We also provided a grants and fiscal update training for all schools and their fiscal teams to make sure that everybody is familiar with things like our budget workbooks. We have been holding weekly office hours through the first quarter. Those are on Fridays, and we will continue to hold those through at least October and potentially longer, depending on when CFA allocations come out. And then we also provide grant updates in our biweekly newsletter. So I am happy to take any questions about our relief funding.
Questions? I just want to say thank you for your continued work as we transition the formerly ASD schools into our LEA. This is a challenge both for the schools and for you as leading the staff, and I appreciate everything you're doing. I do hope that, and I do appreciate that we did not retain any of the Best for All funding. I think one of the things that bothers me the most about this whole situation is the one thing that's outside your control, which is the delay in the release of these funds. You know, we're in October, closer to Halloween than the beginning of the month, and obviously still a ways from getting funds released so that they can be passed down to our schools. So maybe at some point in time, maybe in the spring, once this budget cycle has completed, we can have a talk about what conversations might be had to move this along. I know ESSER funding release is a big deal for every LEA in the state, so maybe it's something we can take up with the DOE. But I just want to thank you all for your hard work. I think you've done a great job. And I do want to commend you for having office hours. I think a lot of people who are dealing with the Internal Revenue Service would like to have office hours. So thank you so much. And Commissioner Tucker.
I like being able to be up here for all these other committees. This is fun. I just have one quick question. A couple slides back, you don't need to go back, but the IDEA allocation, you said that you're having discussions. Are you at a point, are you discussing weighting that funding? Is that what the discussion is? Or are you at a place where you can say what you're discussing? Am I ruining it? I don't know. I'm just curious because my ULF fellows recommended that a few years ago, so I'm trying to figure out if I can tell them, good job.
Yes, Commissioner Tucker, we're looking at weighting methodologies and ways that we can make sure that we're equitably distributing those funds as much as possible. Something that we've looked at as well is the TISA weighting and what that looks like. So we know that there's going to be a lot of realigning with the state on state funds, and so we think it's also appropriate to investigate that as well for our IDA allocations.
Awesome. All for it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on.
All right, I will now talk you through the Bluff Plan of Correction. So there were 4 main areas for improvement for Bluff City that are outlined here on the slide. They also detailed improvement objectives that are similar to their interim that they submitted to us as part of their interim process. So these improvement objectives were adapted by Commission staff for this plan of correction. So as you can see, the areas of improvement, there were 4 main areas of improvement here: cumulative progress towards academic goals. And so as you can see, their improvement objectives are outlined here in regards to increasing academic achievement and growth, improving percentages of students in Tier 1, and then increasing composite ACT score averages as well. The second area of improvement is around chronic absenteeism. They're looking to reduce their number of students chronically absent by 15% each quarter to meet a yearly goal of decreasing chronic absenteeism by 50%. Also, their suspension rate here, reduce the number of suspensions to under 35 per year, and then enrollment trends, increasing and retaining 40 new students for a total enrollment of 590 students for fiscal year 24. So one exciting update that Bluff City provided us in the last meeting is that they are making significant progress towards their enrollment trend. So they are enrolled in regards to their ADM this year, which is a great update. So some timelines in terms of our plan of correction. September 1st, Bluff City submitted a first draft of their plan of correction to the commission. Commission staff provided detailed feedback on that plan. On September 15th, the revised plan was submitted. On September 16th, commission staff met with Bluff City leadership team to review the plan together, and Bluff City provided us some updates at that time, like the one that I mentioned to you earlier. And on November 16th, commission staff are actually going to visit Bluff City in person. We're going to conduct our plan of correction meeting together with their leadership team there, and we'll also do a walkthrough of the building at that time. At the January 2023 meeting, we'll provide updates. And in July, we'll provide an update on their yearly performance under this plan, and we'll determine if they stay on probationary status.
Are there any questions, comments? I'm sorry. The only one that I would have is that when you have your November 16th meeting, that you really do a deep dive on their absenteeism. If they don't make progress on that beginning at the first fall, they're never going to get there by the end of the year. So we need to stay laser focused, and they need to understand we're going to be laser focused on it. I know they're taking a lot of steps, and we're hoping they work. So we'll hope for the best.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Richards. As Kelly mentioned, I will be providing a little bit more context on the school security assessment process and where we are in implementation of both follow-up with those, the Safe Schools grant, and then the new executive order that Governor Lee signed related to school safety and security. So most importantly, all of our schools have completed their security assessments. Those have all been sent to the TDOE, and they have also completed all of their emergency operations plans. We've also completed our LEA emergency operations plan. Something that was new this year under Governor Lee's executive order is there was a sort of new annex that provided a holistic overview of any trends that we're seeing across our schools, and we had to outline some action steps that we will be taking to address those. Those could range from technical assistance to making sure that funds were targeted to address those areas, any policy changes if needed, and so we found that to be a very helpful tool. Something else that we have done when preparing the Safe Schools budgets is to review the budgets submitted by the schools to make sure that they very clearly align with their security assessment findings. And so while we were very grateful that most of our schools, the vast majority of our schools were rated low risk, everybody had some level of something that could be addressed with those funds. I do want to emphasize that the school security assessments are extremely detailed, everything from do you have a controlled entry point to your school building to do you have a plan to have your light bulbs checked every month. So there's a wide range of things that are captured here, and we wanted to make sure those funds were targeted to those needs. Something else that I did this quarter was I participated in a group feedback session with the TDOE specific to the security assessment tool and how they're thinking about updating that in the future. We do know and have heard anecdotally that there are some unique challenges for charter schools, and so it was great to sort of hear from other districts and as well as be able to provide some feedback to the TDOE for that security assessment and ways to kind of provide more outreach to charter schools. The last thing that I do want to flag is that as part of the executive order, all districts are going to be undergoing a security audit on a 5-year cycle. So this year, the TDOE will be monitoring our schools and visiting them and doing a walkthrough of their building against the security assessment. So we have been communicating with our schools about that and look forward to getting more information about that process and what it'll look like.
Are there any questions? Okay, I would just say that obviously this is the single most important thing that we do. And this is going to remain an agenda item for this committee for the rest of this year and probably for the foreseeable future. I'm very interested to learn more about the executive order and how we have to implement that. Even if we are in year 1 of the audit, I would like us to have a self-audit process that we would use in years when we are not being audited. I don't want the schools to get audited and then think for 4 years they don't have to worry about being audited. We need to have a self-audit process, so this is top of mind every year with every single one of our schools. So thank you so much for your work. We're going to keep after it. Yes, Mr. Chairman?
So I have a couple questions here. So charter schools that aren't under our jurisdiction, I think what we've been going through for the past several months is everybody lumps charter schools with us, and that's okay. So I want to make sure that we're comfortable that those school districts that have charter schools, that we know what steps are being taken there. Because if people think that we're responsible for them, I mean, while we're not, I think it'd be good for us to have a pretty good overview so that we can talk about that. And it's not just the schools that clearly are, that we are responsible for, but all of them in general. Because I think that's one of the lessons I've learned over the past several months is everybody sort of has put them underneath us, and that's fine. We'll take them. But in doing that, we've got to make sure we are able to have access to information and if we find that there are issues, not ours to deal with, but make sure that's understood that, they are handled. You mentioned special, sort of, I'm not going to remember your words exactly, but that charter schools have sort of different type needs. Could you share a little bit about what you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Chair Griscom. So I think something that was interesting about the kind of feedback session that I participated in was, one, hearing from Metro Nashville Public Schools and being able to also talk with their security office representative about how they're serving their charter schools. One unique need that I think we've seen, not just for our schools, but across the sector, is particularly when a new school opens, making sure that law enforcement knows that, hey, this building that was a church or that was an office building, there's a school here now, and that they're engaging with law enforcement officers proactively so that they're aware that they're there. We have seen occasionally, it can be hard for a school, for example, to identify the right point of contact at their local law enforcement agency. So occasionally, it may be that we have a school kind of opening under our district and they say, oh, we'll go to MNPS, they'll connect you with the right person, and we have to say, no, like, we want to build these relationships. And so something that I think was also very productive was that being able to participate in that feedback session and get to know some other district leaders, I was able to actually get some great contact information with the sheriff's office and get some better points of contact, as well as hear from some other districts about how they work with their charter schools as well.
Thank you. Okay. We're now going to proceed to our final item, which is a special populations update. Our executive director gave a comprehensive presentation in July regarding the district and school demographic makeups and how our team provides oversight and monitoring of schools with regard to special populations. But at this moment, I'd like to recognize Kelly Croneman and Reggie Epps to provide updates on this topic since the July meeting.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Richards. So as you mentioned, my name is Kelly Croneman. I'm here with my colleague Reggie Epps to provide you all with an update on the special populations at our schools. We've had some really great conversations over the last several months around the services and protections that our schools are providing to student subgroups and how we as the authorizer and district are supporting our schools and holding them accountable to this charge. I want to first call back to a couple points that Tess made during our July meetings as context to the updates that we will be presenting today. So first is that our charter schools must comply with federal and state regulations around providing appropriate services to students with disabilities, English learners, and other students with diverse needs. And charter schools must also comply with federal and state anti-discrimination laws. The second point I want to call back to is that we as the Charter Commission serve as both authorizer and LEA to the schools in our portfolio. This means that not only are our charter schools accountable to us for their compliance with these statutes, but we must also have robust systems of oversight to ensure that our schools are correctly serving our special populations of students, since we are subject to the same state monitoring and reporting that other LEAs are held to. So with that context now laid, Reggie and I will take the next few minutes to give an overview of our school's current percentages of students with disabilities and limited English proficient students, as well as an update on the beginning of year support and monitoring that we've engaged in with our schools. So Tess provided a very detailed overview during the commission meeting in July of our school's subgroup demographics for students with disabilities and limited English proficient students compared to their resident districts and the state. For today, I'm just going to provide a brief update on what our school's percentages of students with disabilities and limited English proficient students currently are now that we've gotten settled into this new school year, and I'm happy to take any questions later. So looking first at our limited English proficient students, this includes students who are active English learners, students who have waived direct EL services, and students in their first 2 years of transition from direct EL services, as these students are receiving additional academic monitoring. Looking at the limited English proficient students identified and served within our portfolio, you can see that we have a pretty wide range. Some of our schools in Memphis serve less than 1% of limited English proficient students, and some of our schools here in the Antioch area serve over 30%. Now looking at our students with disabilities across our portfolio. Some of our schools also, we have a wide range. We have some schools serving less than 10%, and then some schools serving over 20%. I do want to note that one of the things that we've been talking about over the last few months is how are we really supporting our schools with their child find requirements. So Tess spoke about the review that we've done of our operators' websites during our commission meeting in July, making sure that they not only have language speaking to the prohibition of discrimination for student subgroups, but also speaking to the services that they do actively provide to students with disabilities and English learners. In addition to that, now that we've got our first quarter wrapped up and schools have had time to get information from previous districts transferred for students who are newly enrolling into our district, and we have a better idea of what our school's numbers are shaking out to be for the year, we're able to have more targeted conversations during our monthly special populations meetings with schools around what their percentages of students with disabilities and EL look like compared to the schools around them. And part of that conversation with regard to Child Find is really making sure that we're understanding what the school's RTI process looks like, as well as how they are training the teachers and staff in the school around the requirements and process for referring students for special education evaluation. Looking at our beginning of year procedures, I want to note that our schools invest a very significant amount of time and effort in enrolling and identifying students with disabilities and English learners during the beginning of each school year. It's very important that our team maintains close communication with our schools so that we can walk them through the huge load of tasks that must be completed within the first couple months of school. Perhaps most challenging is obtaining EL and special education documentation from the previous districts for our students who are newly enrolling. Oftentimes, we also find that some of that documentation can be incomplete even when we do receive it. Reggie has spent many hours working on behalf of our schools to get students' documentation transferred into our student platforms so that schools can begin providing comparable services while developing new IEPs and 504 plans. I also want to give a shout out to our teammate Lawrence, who has been instrumental in helping us to make sure that there are smooth transitions for students coming from different districts into our student information system, which then feeds into our special education and English learners systems as well. Schools must schedule IEP and 504 team meetings within 30 days of enrollment for new students, and this also represents a significant lift for these school teams. Schools must also screen students for EL services and develop new individualized learning plans or ILPs for English learners within the first 30 days as well. We consider these requirements to be essential because they make the difference between a student who's starting the year off with the appropriate services or starting the year off without those supports. Reggie and I have provided training to new operators to ensure that they are aware of these timelines and prepared to meet them, and Reggie has worked very closely with some of our schools to ensure that students are appropriately screened and set up for success. We monitor compliance with these timelines and continue to have monthly calls with schools to help address any roadblocks and provide updates and support as needed. We've also just wrapped up our quarter one desktop monitoring process, which Reggie will speak on a little bit more in a minute here. And during that time, we pull randomly selected student files from each school to monitor their compliance with IDEA, 504, and English learner requirements. School points of contact have received copies of the results of this monitoring, including required corrections in cases where there have been findings. And finally, we've also reviewed licensure for teachers providing special education and direct English learner services to ensure that our schools are compliant with endorsement and student-teacher ratio requirements. The results of these beginning of year monitoring activities will also be summed up and included in the quarterly monitoring letters that our authorizing team is going to be providing to schools in alignment with the end of year school performance framework evaluation, so that our school leaders, their governing boards, are aware of what the GLOws and GROws are in terms of the compliance and services to these student subgroups. I'll now hand it over to Reggie to provide a brief overview of our Q1 desktop monitoring, including trends and the supports that we are providing to our schools at the district level.
Thank you. As Kelly just mentioned, we just completed Q1 monitoring for all of our schools. And to point out some of our trends that we've seen, the first one is norming of documentation for our IEP process. We've seen with our schools that we've had a few issues with this, mainly due to the new staff members and not having been trained on the ways that we expect the documentation to be provided to parents, and also to the uploading those to Easy IEP. However, we have provided some additional trainings. Recently, we did a IEP training. We also did a 504 training to correct those issues that we've seen and help schools understand the process of uploading that documentation. When it comes to the EL side of it, we've also seen some of those issues with like ILPs, making sure our schools are providing the appropriate services for our students and identifying these service hours for our students. Those are the two areas that we've seen the biggest issues in. However, schools have been notified of those small issues and have corrected those recently, as we sent the letters out last week to schools before fall break. On some positive notes, we have noticed that all of our schools have included licensed teachers for all of the areas, including special education and EL teachers. So for the majority of our schools, they are meeting that requirement. And also, Kelly mentioned at the beginning of the school year, our EL screening and identification went really well. Our schools were able to get all of our new students screened in the 30-day time frame, and also identify students who transferred from outside of our district to make sure that they were properly placed in the right classrooms for EL services. So supports that we have provided recently, again, we provided some virtual trainings to all of our schools where we did 504 training, we did IEP writing process training. We've also provided our schools with a one-pager for IEPs on the appropriate ways of writing instructional appropriate IEPs. And then we're also reviewing all the ILP components for all of our schools and making sure all the documents from previous districts have transferred and uploaded to our platform of Elevation. At this time, I will open up for any questions concerning Special Pops.
Commissioner Tucker?
I'm happy to wait until actual committee members, or I can just, okay. So I have a couple questions on the demographics. Cornerstone Prep, it looks like they serve less than 1% EL population and a 7% student with disability population.
So there are three different, it's two different Cornerstone Preps. One,
Right.
the Cornerstone Prep only serves kindergarten currently, so it's only 80
Okay,
students.
my question was the why. So they still have less than 1% okay. That makes more sense. EL makes more sense than students with disabilities, even just demographically, I think. Okay, and then Nashville Collegiate Prep is now at 4% from that's this year's?
Yes.
That's after a commitment to more aggressive enrollment of students with disabilities. They moved it up to 4 from 3%.
That's correct, but that does not include any students who are in the process of being going through this SPED process right now. The referral process. There are two to three additional students that are in the referral process currently.
Through Child Find, or are they newly enrolled, or, I mean, because you guys are well aware,
Both.
Make
Yes.
sure the commission knows there are tight timelines on that. So mid-October, if you have a student who enrolled in August, and I mean, I guess you could start testing and see some issues, and then it can certainly happen. Okay. If they do, so you said 2 more students?
2 to 3, yes.
Okay, so 2 to 3, if they were identified as students with disabilities, they're still at 4% probably, right? That doesn't really do much. Okay. And then I'm actually, rocket ships, other schools have had a much higher percentage of students with disabilities, the metro schools. Do we know what that, I mean, is it in an area, I mean, I'm confused because rocket ship historically serves a higher percentage of kids with disabilities.
Yes. I don't have Rocket Ship United, which I think would be the most comparable school. I don't have their data on me right now, but you are correct. They do serve a higher percentage of students with disabilities. So that's, like I mentioned, we're going to be having conversations over the next several months with the schools during their monthly special populations check-in meetings around what the child find process looks like, you know, starting with RTI, but also, like I mentioned before, talking about how are we making sure that teachers are aware of the referral process, because as you well know, Commissioner Tucker, we don't need to wait for a student to go through the RTI system if there are concerns that there may be a disability at play.
Right, and I appreciate you saying that and making sure that you're making our schools aware of that. I think across the country, there are schools, a lot of districts, that think you have to go through and collect all these data points through RTI to be able to then move to the IEP process, which is, as you guys know, not actually true. So I appreciate that you're making sure our schools aren't doing that. The only other demographic question I have for Memphis, do they not have a lot of EL students? I'm just confused about the low, and this isn't judgment at all, I'm just asking, the low numbers for EL for Cornerstone Prep, which is the kindergarten, so that makes sense. Lester Prep, and then I know Libertas serves a high enrollment of students with disabilities, but I'm just curious about
It
that.
completely depends on the neighborhood that's
Yep,
being served
okay,
in Memphis.
that's fair.
There are different clusters depending on the neighborhood.
And the prior ASD schools were actually zoned schools, so it really was more neighborhood dependent than our New Start open enrollment schools. Right? I mean, I know they're open enrollment now, but they start, okay, so that makes more sense. The desktop monitoring, I love that you guys are doing that. One question I have, are you able, and the answer may be now yes and later no, I don't know, but are you able to do any sort of monitoring that actually involves watching, not just reviewing the documentation, but seeing what's happening in the building? So if, you know, a well-written IEP that isn't implemented doesn't do any good, so I'm just...
As part of the monitoring, we also request like service logs to make sure students are receiving the services that are supposed to be provided. So each school sends us a copy of the service logs. We also look at like the scheduling of students to make sure that the scheduling is appropriate, make sure that there is a special ed teacher in that classroom. They're supposed to have like co-taught services. So we are monitoring services for all the students also.
Okay.
And when it comes to on-site services as well, that's something that we include in our site visits that
Okay,
happen
perfect.
annually each year for each school. We have somebody going into classrooms specifically for the purpose of having the IEP or ILP of a student or students that are in that classroom and making sure that that student is receiving the appropriate either direct services or accommodations or mix, you know,
Perfect.
depending on what the scenario might be.
I wish every district had, I mean, and again, as we grow, I don't know what this continues to look like, but you guys have clearly thought about it from all angles, and that's awesome. Are our schools, I'm remembering the federal guidance, and I don't know if it has changed or not, around, as schools came back in person from COVID, the ability with parental consent to conduct virtual IEP and 504 team meetings. Have we taken a position on that as a district, and are our schools allowing parents to participate virtually in IEP and 504? I only ask that because for a lot of parents, I like to be in person. I bring snacks, but a lot of parents don't have the ability to participate fully in person, and they're able to virtually, so I didn't know if that was something.
Yeah, access for parents is certainly one of the biggest priorities. We want to make sure that we're empowering parents to be involved in these really important meetings. So our schools do have the option for parents to participate either through phone, which is what we typically see more now that we've kind of moved past the remote schooling period of the pandemic. You know, in person is still probably the best scenario, but that phone option is especially essential to parents who, you know, may have scheduling issues with, you know, jobs or whatever it is, mobility
Transportation,
issues,
yep.
all kinds of things. Yes.
Okay, great. And then the last, because we are doing these New Start appeals, I just feel like, I'm going to say it later, but I'm going to say it now. Special ed, I know more on the special ed side, but special ed and EL, these are complicated things. And so I think when some people see recommendations around New Start appeals and they say they don't have a good plan for kids with disabilities, I think some people in the public are like, well, that's just a small percentage of they don't understand that A, it's the law. But also, if you're not able to serve the neediest students, like not able to even make a plan to educate the neediest students, you're not going to be able to adequately educate the other kids either. And so I really want to point out that you guys have an incredible support for our schools, which I love. But as we grow, it will be more important for us as a commission to really scrutinize these areas. And I think we're doing it, and I think the recommendation reports reflect that, but really scrutinize these areas in the application stage. Because if they're not set up for success on paper, they are definitely not going to be set up for success when they actually get on the ground. I think I saw in one of these, there are parents of kids with disabilities on the board, and that's great. I'm a parent of a kid with a disability, but I would not, I'm a lawyer, I'm a disability lawyer, and I still would not be able to do what needs to be done to be able to make a school ready. And so I don't know, I feel like it needs to be said as much as possible. This stuff isn't easy. And so thank you guys for all you're doing on it. The only other thing I want to point out is I am glad that we're seeing licensed staff providing the services, but I just want to point, that is the law. Like a school is violating federal law if they don't have that. So applause that they're doing it, but that to me is the floor, and I love that you guys are really looking at where they are towards the ceiling and really pushing them to make sure that all students are welcome and can excel. So I'm just really happy that you guys are in these roles. I want to thank you.
Are there any other questions from committee members? Derwin?
Yes, I don't want to make Wendy unhappy, so I feel like we should just leave it at that. But adding to what Wendy or Commissioner Tucker just described, even as schools are approved, are we auditing how students are counseled out potentially? Because that also happens, and that's something that I think we need to be mindful for as a commission. Students end up going from one school, bounce to the next, and sometimes within the district. So even if we can't audit who goes outside of the ASD or the commission, what does it mean for students to go within schools? And I know fellow colleagues here who have former ASD schools know that was a trend. How are we watching for that?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Assistant. We have monthly data checks with our schools. So on a monthly basis, Reggie is pooling the numbers of students with disabilities, of English learners, and of all the other various student subgroups at each of our schools. And one of the things that we talk about is if we see a big jump or dip in those numbers, that's important for having conversation around what is going on. If it's a jump, that's great, but if we see, all of a sudden a bunch of students leave, that's certainly a concern. We also have sightlines into that, not just looking at the overall student numbers, but because they're frequently going into Easy IEP and checking to make sure our schools are maintaining compliance with the timeline requirements, we can have a better sightline into which students are leaving as well. So we do have oversight into that. Another thing that we do as well is if we receive any complaints, parent complaints or community member complaints, that's something that we also have the opportunity to have a conversation with the school with, and if any additional action is needed at that point, that can be taken.
Are there any other questions or concerns? Well, thank you both so much for this update. We will be continuing to monitor this closely going forward. I just want to say I am so impressed that these schools have licensed teachers, because having seen the issues with availability of licensed teachers across the entire state, I know that this is a tremendous struggle for schools, be they ours or in the districts, and I commend them for having gotten that done. Okay, with that, I thank you all for your attendance and participation at this meeting of the School Performance and Accountability Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. Are there any other comments or questions? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.
Chase, how much time do we need to give the reset of the live stream? 10 minutes? Okay, well, let's say we'll start next committee at 11:15 to allow everyone a quick break. And we are so glad to see Alan and Eddie ready for the next committee meeting.